The U.S. has earmarked about $30 billion worth of funding for the CHIPS Act to support domestic semiconductor manufacturing. We've previously reported on amounts received by Intel, TSMC, and Samsung. That means there's about $6 billion left in the fund, and that is reportedly the amount that Micron will be receiving. Does this close the CHIPS Act, and is the U.S. going to be getting what it's asking for?
Yeah, I think that this is a really interesting story because, well, first off, it hasn't been announced yet. So the rumors say that President Biden will be going to Syracuse, New York, to announce this tomorrow. Assuming that that's what happens, then Micron would basically get the remainder of the grant money. Now, as you may know, the CHIPS Act actually has $114 billion of government incentives, but a lot of that is loans and tax incentives and other things. Of the grant money, basically cash money given out to companies to do stuff, this would represent the end of it. As you mentioned, we've talked a lot about the CHIPS Act on the rundown. Some of our fans are probably tired of hearing us talking about it, but I figured we would be remiss if we talked about Intel's funding and TSMC's and Samsung's, and we didn't mention Micron. Micron was basically the last man standing. I think there were some people wondering, hey, how come they didn't get any CHIPS Act funding? Well, I think they're gonna, and I think it's going to be about $6 billion because that's about what's left to give out. That would be about the same as some of the other companies have received in direct grants. I think there could also be some other aspects to this that we could see. There could be loans. There could be other incentives coming from the federal government as well as from the state of New York. Reports suggest that the governor of New York will be there as well, and she's likely to try to support it as much as she can, though I doubt that they've got billions to hand out. In addition to the companies that we mentioned, by the way, I should also mention that BAE Systems, Microchip Technology, and Global Foundries also received CHIPS Act support. And again, this all points to Micron getting what's left. This Micron has also talked previously about the fact that they were eyeing expansion overseas, for example. And I think that that may have been a way for them to make sure that they got what was coming to them and that they got a fair share in comparison to some of these other companies. Overall, this looks like a big investment. Micron, of course, is in Boise, Idaho, and they are doing a lot of expansion in the upstate New York area. And I think that this is a way for upstate New York to make sure that it's got its share of funding as well. And this, I think, overall is a good move. New York is a great place. There's lots of workers there. There's lots of water, lots of power. Makes a lot of sense. Kind of like Ohio makes sense for Intel, and kind of like some of the other locations leave some of us scratching our heads. Will the U.S. get what they want? Well, they're certainly going to get manufacturing. The question is, what is going to be manufactured? How much of it is going to be purely domestic? And will it actually make sense for customers to use this? Essentially, I think it's important to remember that all this money is going to fund factories without products to make necessarily. The next step is going to be for all of these companies, Intel, Samsung, TSMC, and Micron, to decide what to put there. Many of them will likely put their own products in there, except TSMC, which doesn't have its own final products. Certainly Intel, Samsung, and Micron are likely to use their factories to produce their own finished products. But beyond that, I think everybody recognizes the fact that every one of these companies has to find customers, and those customers have to be willing to work with new fabs in new areas. Plus, we've heard some rumors about difficulty in terms of getting employees that want to work the way that these companies want to work, culture clashes between the specifically, especially with TSMC and American workers. And I think a lot of that stuff is things that we're going to have to overcome in order to get these factories up and running and for the U.S. to get the kind of payout that it wants from this funding.